Well, thanks a lot for having me today. I feel super overdressed. And besides being here for this, the other reason for dressing like this is that I got to go to a council meeting later on today. And thanks for that introduction, because it kind of gives a little bit of focus provides a little bit of focus of what I should be talking about today. And many of us have been involved in this last couple of years on Water Act modernization and the Water Sustainability Act and that sort of thing. So I won't kind of go into that and just kind of stay with the whole area or residential side of things. If you're into water, you know that water is a renewable resource, and yet it doesn't necessarily mean that it's completely, abundant, right? And so, but, one of the reasons that local governments should be interested in this issue is that even if surface water and groundwater sources were abundant, there are other drivers. And the drivers include the increasing costs associated with collecting that water, treating that water, distributing that water. And then on the other end, if you think of water as a closed loop, after when we use that water, we kind of flush it down the drain, and we have to collect it, treat it, and dispose of it again. And those costs are rapidly increasing for various reasons. So for example, on the water treatment side in the North Shore, the Metro Vancouver region just completed a couple of years ago an $800 million water filtration plant for Seymour and Capilano watersheds. And on the sewer side, I don't know if you know, but sewage is essentially 99.95% water and 0.05% contaminants. It's like having a bucket of water and putting a drop of contaminants into it, and you have sewage. And so the costs associated with treating that these days on the North Shore right now, we're debating the $700 million secondary treatment update process to the Lionsgate plant. And those costs are going to impact all the users and the households on the North Shore. So, even financial issues alone should cause people to think very, very strongly about water and water issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about West Vancouver as a case study for residential water metering. And it'll be interesting to hear what my City of Vancouver colleagues think. But if we just talk about water metering per se, I actually believe that the public are way ahead of politicians on this one. When we proposed a universal water metering project in West Vancouver way back in 2005, the residents actually never really complained about that. It wasn't the residents that, they got it. They realized that, hey, we should adopt more of a user pay type of perspective, and they understood metering. It was more politicians that had a hard time with it, and this is where staff tried to frame it in a way that it would be politically acceptable. So yeah, we started off with a water conservation strategy that the district issued in 2002, and we then backed that up with a proposal to go to universal water metering in 2005. We retrofitted over 9,000 homes with meters, and it cost the municipality through the ratepayers $6.5 million. It was completed on time and on budget. The thing that we found out about West Vancouver was that the amount of water usage is super variable. You have people that use very, very little water, and you have what we would call, water hogs. And when we looked at the data, it was suggesting that 70% of the water that was demanded by the residential sector but was being used up by the top 16% of users, okay? And faced with that, the whole notion of flat rates became inequitable. And so that's really why we went into metering. Now, as successful as metering is, I want to really state that meters alone do not conserve any water whatsoever. They're just a little tool that water goes spinning inside that measures. But that meter doesn't actually save water itself. The reason that metering is so important to a water conservation strategy is because it provides data. It provides data that you can get feedback on, and when you combine that data with a supporting rate structure and incentives to encourage a more sustainable behavior, that's when you can kind of make gains in water conservation. So just very quickly, in West Vancouver, we've adopted a two-part inclining block structure. So that's just a real fancy way of saying that it's a little bit like BC Hydro. You have a flat rate, a base rate, which is sort of like a connection charge. It covers fixed costs that the utility incurs, and whether or not you turn on the taps, the municipality had to go through considerable effort to put the water mains up to your doorstep, so that if you turned on the water, that it would flow, and also if you had a fire there, that we would deliver the water to your doorstep to fight a fire. So there's some fixed costs associated with that. Then, besides the fixed costs, we have a volumetric component, which is dependent on how much you use. And by inclining block, what we mean is that rather than normal when you have bulk discounts, when you buy more of something, your unit is less. In this case, it's actually the exact opposite. So the more you consume, the higher that unit rate is. And so we have a volume charge. We also decided to link our sewer charges to that, believe it or not. And so our basic charge is for sanitary sewer collection and also for storm drainage as well. And then we have a volume charge also with our sanitary sewers, which is quite unusual. So what we've done is that we've used water demand as a proxy for your sewage generation, and through a really difficult, hard to understand formula that I won't go into unless you kind of ask me about it later on. We use water demand as a proxy for what the sewer charges are. And then so there's an extra incentive for people to save water. Other municipal actions include things like sprinkling restrictions that we have all over the region. We also wanted to show leadership, and so we made every single department within the municipality pay for water as well. So parks has to pay for their own water. Community services pays for their own water. Every single department pays for their own water, and so no one gets a free ride. And so we were sort of able to demonstrate that we're being consistent ourselves. One thing, we've also provided things like water conservation fixtures, waterless urinals, all those type of things in facilities and whatnot. And so we've tried to have some demonstration in that. But the last thing that was really surprising from metering was understanding how much leakage there is in the system. So we have a water meter right at the property line, and then you have a private side service connection that goes from the property line into the home. And it's interesting because there's a lot of old housing stock out there. And if you never had a meter to meter that water coming into the household, you would probably never know that it was leaking unless water was bubbling up to the surface or something like that. But in West Van, there's a lot of steep grade topography, and where you see the leak is not necessarily where it would manifest itself, and so it would disappear. And what we actually found as soon as we installed meters was all these leaks all over the system that we've been able to attack. And the incentive for the homeowner is that, the water passed through the meter to your house, so you consumed it technically. And so you need to get on top of that, or else you're going to end up paying for that charge. And that's worked really, really well. I'll jump straight to the results. So because we had such a variability, we couldn't actually even use averages. And so when we analyze the data, we go according to the median, and how much would the median customer pay for their water bill compared to what they were using or what they were paying for before. And what we found out was for the first couple of years, the median bill actually dropped. So in other words, the fixed rate that we had before was actually subsidizing the high users. And when you got a more equitable rate structure in there, we found out that the median bill actually reduced. And so that was interesting to see. So what we found out was that universal metering actually benefited the majority of the residents. And in terms of comparing pre-metering to post-metering, we've seen a 25% drop in water demand, and that's been sustained pretty much through since 2007. Each year, depending on the weather, it goes up, it goes down, hot summer and all that sort of stuff, but more or less it's been about 25% reduction since the time when we had before meters. So with that, I'll wait until the interactive part.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Ray.
Hi. I'm going to stand up if that's okay, just because we're going to use some of these slides here. And I don't know who's controlling us. I am here. Is that right?
I can tell you.
Okay, easy. So let's give a brief overview of the Metro Vancouver water, where the reservoirs are and kind of the system. And then I'll hand it off to Kyra, and she'll give a bit of a snapshot of how City of Vancouver is using water, who the users are, how they use water, and where we're at with our Greenest City Action Plan. She'll explain that. And then after that, I'll give a bit of a detailed description of some of the programs and policy that we have in place in the City of Vancouver. And a bit of an Apple... help me out. There we go. More background. Okay.
You want me to just do it while you talk?
Maybe that would be helpful. So this is kind of a picture of how the water system works. We have our 3 reservoirs. We have Seymour, Capilano, and Coquitlam. And they go through treatment and filtration. Water is then sent to the City of Vancouver, where we're responsible for it, and we distribute it to residents and ICI customers. That's industrial, commercial, and institutional. And then the wastewater goes to the treatment plant and then is sent out through an outfall in the Strait of Georgia. And so here's another aerial photo of kind of our watersheds. So all of those watersheds are protected areas. They're not open to the public. So we have a really unique situation here in Vancouver where we have protected watersheds. There's no one on boats on those waters. Really, no one has access to it. So we have a really good, clean, protected water source. And so with those water sources going, thinking into the future, we're thinking of climate change. We don't know what kind of impact that's going to have. Maybe we'll get less rainfall, less snow, and so with less snow melt, we have less supply to carry us through the summer months when we don't have rainfall. And we also have population growth. That's a bit of a strain on our supply. So why conserve water? That's a really tough message that we find really challenging. The City of Vancouver is trying to explain to residents why conserve water. It rains so much here. And so there are financial benefits to that, and those being saving the money. It costs a lot of money to build a dam. So if we have to build more dams or we have to increase the capacity of our current dams or reservoirs, that's billions of dollars, and nobody wants to pay for that. And the other costs that are environmental costs. So building a dam can be really devastating to an ecosystem, and I don't think anyone wants to see that. So Vancouver developed the Greenest City Action Plan, which Kyra will go into a little bit and give an overview and introduction of that.
I'll stand here just so I'm a little bit taller. All right, so you can change the slide. So in 2011, the city did an extensive consultation of the public to develop the Greenest City Action Plan. And it sets out a number of goals and targets in a variety of different areas, as you can see listed here, that the city has to meet or is strongly encouraged to meet by 2020. And as you can see, obviously there is a clean water goal on the list. So that's where I come into the equation. So within the water goals, so the overarching goal is that Vancouver will have the best drinking water of any city in the world. The 2 goals within that target are that we want to meet or beat the strongest of BC, Canadian, and appropriate international drinking water quality standards and guidelines. So we can check that box. We're doing it. We have rigorous water quality testing, and it's always doing really well. So there's nothing to really focus on too much there. Where obviously it's still on our radars, but it's not the main focus. Where we are focusing our attention is reducing the per capita water consumption by 33% from 2006 levels. So, you can go. Water story, pretty slide. The next slide would be great. So this one here gives you a sense of water usage within Vancouver. So what it shows you is that within the single family, which is the yellow, and the multi-residential buildings, which is the sort of lime green, we're at 55%. So those two groups alone, really the residential groups, use about 55% of our water. Within the IC&I, the industrial, commercial, and institutional, which is the other sort of shades of green and bluey green, we're at, I believe, 30% of our water usage. Currently to date, and then the biggest other use would be the leaks, which is 11% there. So to date, we have residential programs that we've been incorporating into our policies and our toolkits, and we've also been looking at leaks as well, like the West Van. But we haven't focused a lot of attention on the IC&I, and they are using 30% of our water. So we figure this is an area we want to put some time into and look at. So you can pull on the next one. So this graph shows a little bit about where we're at in terms of meeting our goal. So we have an 18% decrease in total water consumption since 2006. And before we all give ourselves pats on the back, we still have 15% to go. And so we looked really closely at our data to see what was happening. And if you look at the light blue, that's the trend line from 2006. And if you follow that trend line down, we're meeting our 2020 goals, which is that dashed lime green, no problem. But if you just look at the last 4 years, which is the darker blue, we're pretty far from that green line. We're not going to meet where we need to go. So again, that's why we're starting to think about what kind of programs to implement to ensure we do get to that 2020 goal that we've set for ourselves. So the next slide. So just speaking a little bit to the residential side, this graph shows where we've come and where we're at. We started at 320 liters, and we're down to 260 liters per person, or per capita. And that's a 19% reduction. That trend line is great. Like we're happy with it. It's going down. So we're thinking again, what's the problem? Where do we need to look? And if you follow the next slide, this one shows what's happening in the other sectors. So the biggest number that jumps out is the institutional is 24% increase since between 2012 and 2013. And so we need to figure out like why these increases are happening and what we can do to address them and make an impact so they start to go down instead of up. And one of the sort of common thinking is that, oh no, it's going up, but it's not always a bad story. For example, when hotel water consumption goes up, it could be a reflection of a really booming economy and great growth. So it's not that we want to tell people you can't use water, it has to go down at any cost. It's we need to kind of figure out the best balance between getting it to go down and obviously keeping things like economic growth happening. So we can take the next slide. This one breaks it down a little bit further in the IC&I. So the industrial, you can see it is trending down, but if you look at just that last year, you can see it's coming back up again. And so we're really looking at that closely, and you can look at the other two trend lines, which are quite flat, and in fact, if you look at the actual bars, they're coming up again as well. So within these two trends, there is an opportunity again to get them to come down, and that's where we're going to be focusing our attention as part of this refresh and looking at programs that we can develop for the Greenest City Action Plan to meet the goals that we need to meet. Next slide. Yeah. So I'll hand it back to Shelley to talk a little bit more about the specific programs that we have going on and that we're looking at implementing.
So we have a kind of a toolkit of the different ways that we address water use, and so here's kind of a list of some of the things that we implement. So we've got policy, enforcement, incentives, partnerships, and communication. So on the next slides, I'll go through some of the specific policies and programs that we've been doing and some ideas that we've come up with but aren't necessarily working on. And I'll talk about, you'll see these tools kind of come up. I won't necessarily mention them, but you'll just notice them. So in the residential sector, some of the programs we've been doing. So we have lawn sprinkling. Metro Vancouver sets out regulations for lawn sprinkling, and those are based on water use times to, reduce strain on the system. And so they set out when people can water based on their address, odd or even. And so it's City of Vancouver's responsibility to make sure that our residents are complying with that. So what we've done is we have education and enforcement. For that program, we have 2 bylaw enforcement officers that go around and do patrols. So they patrol the neighborhoods. They see someone sprinkling outside of their times. They'll knock on their door, give them a piece of information, talk to them about water conservation, and hopefully that'll address the issue. They don't sprinkle out of the regulated times again. So what they'll do is then go back to that neighborhood. If they see that person sprinkling their lawn outside of the times, they'll issue a ticket, which is about $100. Might be going up in the future because that turns out people don't care too much about $100. We issued 50 tickets this year and 50 the last year. We've only had enforcement in place for 2 years, and it hasn't gone down. So we'll keep plugging away at that. Another one, so metering single-family homes. So as Ray mentioned, City of Vancouver is not metered. We do have some metering in place. And the way we address that is through construction homes and major renovations. So every time a new home comes down and they build a new home, they're required to get a water meter, and same with major renovations. And I think that cap is based on a dollar value of the renovation. And so those are coming into effect slowly as more and more houses and aging houses come down. More single-family homes are becoming metered. Technology, so we have toilet and shower head retrofits, and one of the programs we did there was with the Green Landlord program. So we approached a property management company and said, hey, replace all your toilets and shower heads and let's do a study. And so we did that, and I think we've only completed phase 1, and we've looked at the data and it looks really promising, and the payback period for that was about 2 years for new toilets and new shower heads for these residents. There's still more data to come for that. And incentives, so we had rain barrels. We actually just finalized our rain barrel program this year, but it was a subsidized program, so you could buy a rain barrel for about half the price of what it cost, and we subsidized that amount, and people could install them in their homes. So next year we're developing a bit of a different plan. It's not on the ground yet, so I don't want to get into too many details about that. And some of the potential things that we're looking at, ideas moving forward, are rain sensor rebates. So nothing makes me more angry than seeing a sprinkler running while it's raining. I see a lot of that, and so and that's just such an unfortunate waste of water. So that's something we'd like to look more closely at, and also strengthening the green building code. To my knowledge, there's only 2 buildings in the City of Vancouver that have rainwater or grey water reuse, and I think part of the reason for that is that our building code doesn't support it. It actually illegalizes rainwater. So that's really unfortunate too. So through time, if we can get more policy change through the building code, I think we'll see more of that. Next slide. So this is the ICI. So the programs we're doing in the ICI sector. So that is some existing programs. We had the small business water audits. So just last year we took 5 different businesses, and what we did was we looked at what's the most abundant business in Vancouver and how are they using water. So we chose restaurants and offices as the most abundant businesses, and the reason to choose them is if we could build a case study on a restaurant that speaks to 5,000 other restaurants, that's going to be more valuable than doing a case study on something that only speaks to 5% of the other businesses. And that's ongoing, so we haven't got the data back from that. We did do the audits and found that once-through cooling was one of the big water wasting culprits, and pre-rinse bay valves and faucet aerators, really small fixes for those ones. The once-through cooling, I don't know if anyone knows what that is. It's so those big coolers that you see, they have a water coming in. It's clean drinking water, cools whatever's in their cooler, and then it just drains. That's it. And it just continually goes. And some of them have recirculating systems, but a lot of them don't, and they're huge water wasters. And a pre-rinse spray valve program, that's something we're just unrolling right now, and what that is, the city's paying for 500 restaurants or other businesses that use pre-rinse spray valves. What those are is they do the rinsing before dishes go into a dishwasher in an industrial setting, and so a lot of those are really inefficient, and they use a lot of hot water, so there's savings to be had through the water use and the energy. And so we partnered with BC Hydro and Fortis on that one. And right now we're just doing the recruitment. So we have about 400 people that have approached us who are interested in it so far. So we've got 100 to go, and then we'll begin with the installations. And then some of the potential things that we're looking at. So water-wise certificates, particularly for craft brewers, hotels, and restaurants. I'm not too sure if other cities have done this, but it seems like something other people are doing with other sustainability initiatives. So we have like energy-wise buildings, especially in the States, we have water-wise buildings. And what it would mean is basically if you use, we'll benchmark them, and if they use less than the benchmark, or they can show what their water use is, we put a sticker on their door, and consumers can look at that sticker and decide if they want to support that business or go somewhere based on their water use practices. Banning once-through cooling, like I just discussed, once-through cooling is a huge water waster. And one city, I think in Alberta, is the town of Olds. If anyone knows where that is, it's a really small little farm town. And they ban once-through cooling, really small town. So I don't know if it's as simple as a big city like Vancouver, where we don't even know how prolific this is at this point. We don't know how many businesses have this or how valued that would be. So that's one thing we'll be looking at over the next few years. And water audits, benchmarking and tracking usage. That one would be for our larger users, figuring out where they're using their water and comparing. Next slide. And the last sector is ourselves. So we need to kind of walk the walks. We do programming within our own civic facilities also. And so one of those is leak detection. So all of our parks are metered and all of our civic buildings are metered. I don't believe they're billed for their water, but we do have all the data, so we know what they're using. And we can detect leaks through that. Retrofits of rental stock. So Vancouver manages quite a bit of rental stock, and so similar to the Green Landlords program earlier, we've done a few programs where we've retrofitted toilets and shower heads again, same thing. And then metering parks. So our parks are currently metered, but it's not set up very well, and we're not we don't bill the parks, and so there's a lot of work that can be done through there to help them understand their water use and work together in a partnership. And then potential water audits for civic buildings. So our civic buildings, we have a lot of newer buildings like the Trout Lake Community Center, and there's a few others that are really water efficient. They're cutting edge, they're beautiful buildings. But we also have a lot of older facilities like City Hall that don't have low flow toilets, and they're not really thinking about water use. So that might be a good opportunity for us to address that with our older infrastructure. And eliminating potable water use for streams and lakes. I don't know if you know about Trout Lake. Trout Lake is topped up with drinking water, which is awful, right? A huge waste of water when we could have a stormwater source for that. And it costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of planning that goes into that. But that's something we'd like to look at for Trout Lake and a few of the other streams in Vancouver. We don't know what the impacts of that are, so we'd like to look into that and do some more studies there. Next slide is questions. That's all I have for that. There's probably more to discuss, and hopefully you guys have some good questions coming out of that.
Thank you. Okay, so let's just open up the questions.
Is there a snitch line? You would like a snitch line. So see people
Oh.
like wandering their lawn.
There is. It's 311.
Okay.
So people can call 311 on their neighbor, and then we don't call it the snitch line. Not when they're listening, anyways. Yeah, a lot of people they'll call on their neighbor lawn sprinkling, and a lot of it is just neighbor disputes. So we have to kind of be able to differentiate if this neighbor is just after this neighbor, or if it's legitimate. And then we send out letters, and the letter will outline the bylaws and why we conserve a little bit of information there. And then they also will go onto the patrol list for the bylaw enforcement. Yeah.
Daniel?
Question for Ray. So can you speak a little bit about the debates or discussions that were happening either with residents or with City Council when you guys were implementing the universal metering?
So I think one of the big debates would be whether the program should have been a universal program or not. And I don't want this to sound like a criticism at all. The City of Vancouver, there's a difference between what West Van ended up doing and what City of Vancouver is doing. I can understand City of Vancouver. They have like 200,000 residential homes, and I don't know, let's just say in round figures, it's $1,000 to meter in the ground out on the street. You're talking like almost $200 million. That's a huge expense. And you look at their breakdown of the water, and it's 30% of it is coming from IC&I. So why would you spend all that much money putting in residential water meters when when 30% of it is actually not even coming from residential sector, it's coming from IC&I. So in West Van, we had that similar sort of debate, and in West Van, the situation was quite different. It's predominantly residential. And not only residential, it's single-family residential, and then remainder being multifamily, a little bit of commercial, and no industrial or institutional. And so with that, it's interesting about the per capita water use going down, And I would suggest that one of the reasons that the per capita water use is going down in the City of Vancouver is because they're putting a lot of multifamily units up in smaller footprints. And so that, you know, in West Van, you've got these huge lots, you've got extensive landscaping, you've got all these type of things. So anyways, when it came down, it was decided that we wanted to have everyone treated fairly, the same. And so it wasn't like, you know, we're going to gradually get these new meters in through new development, but to treat everyone the same, it levels the playing field. And that also was that equity situation that everyone who calls us think that their neighbors are the ones that use a lot of water, not them, okay? Everyone, they think their neighbors use more water than they do. And so what happens is that by having metering on a universal basis, it just kind of cuts through all of that and everyone is treated the same. And so those are some of the debates. There's some other little debates too as to whether the meter should have been inside or outside. It's really cheap to have it inside. Winnipeg uses inside because of, you know, weather conditions, for example. We wanted outside because on the outside, we get to access it and maintain those meters a lot easier. We don't have to go through inside the home. And also that line, that service line, that private side that goes through the lot into the home, that gets captured, and if it was on the inside, we miss all that leakage. So those were some of the debates.
Yeah, Debbie?
I was wondering if either municipality has considered any strategies that are rooted in social psychology to precisely, you know, leverage this neighborly tension to say, like, you know, if I know that my neighbor is doing better than I am at water use, then I might be more incentivized to reduce my own water consumption. I was wondering if you guys have looked at any programs like this.
We've done like some community-based social marketing, and we certainly look at that. I can't really give an example of where we've used that with water conservation. We're using a little bit of it with a different program, which is a stormwater management program, and we're trying to install rain barrels in a community. And so each person who signs up for this rain barrel gets a sign on their lawn that says, "I'm signed up for this rain barrel program, are you?" kind of thing. And so on one block, it's interesting because there's a lot of these, and then on the other streets, there's none. So yeah, we're dabbling with that a little bit.
I think I would add, I mean, if you noticed on the list of programs that are existing, there wasn't a huge communications component, and that's been something that's been on our radar since 2011, and it's difficult to kind of come up with such a comprehensive communications plan in the engineering water department, which is what it has to cover, and then we also then have to loop back with our communications department at the city, and they're extremely busy with a number of different initiatives, for example, the election. So water unfortunately gets pushed a little bit to the bottom of the agenda. And so moving forward, that is something that we really strongly hope to get up and running a little bit more, and looking at the whole social norm aspect and looking at benchmarking and making that information public to other people is something that is on our radar and on our agenda to help us get the water usage down. But to date, there hasn't been huge opportunities to make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Doug McKenzie Moore, community-based social marketing, all that sort of literature suggests that it's really effective, it really works. We've not used it. One is because it's a lot of effort, it's quite costly per unit. It's a very high-touch type of way of doing things. And so we just went for a more direct thing. We're going to put a meter on. We're going to have a rate structure that reinforces those behaviors, and we'll let the wallet dictate at the end of the day what those behaviors should be.
So I know the Green City goals are focusing on conservation, and drinking water quality is really good. But I'm wondering about wastewater effluent, and if that is kind of at all part of the Green City goals, and especially in terms of something like endocrine disrupting chemicals and their impact on the greater habitat.
Yeah, you know, I wasn't with the city when the goals were developed. I saw a little bit of literature on including wastewater, but it wasn't included, and I don't know why. Do you?
A lot of the wastewater is managed by Metro Vancouver. So in that first diagram, it kind of showed the little flow chart.
Way back.
Way back. Wait. Forward. There we go. So really, this is all Metro Vancouver, and just this is City of Vancouver. So it's difficult to manage what they're doing over here on this side. And I don't know if anything's been developed for Metro. I really can't speak to what their communication and what they're promoting there. I don't know if that's helpful.
Maybe I could address that a little bit. I think you're right that there's a long way to go on the wastewater side. I mean, for crying out loud, right now in Lionsgate, we only have primary, right? And we're arguing about getting to secondary. So by going to tertiary, I mean, that's like another, it's like exponential cost difference. And so it's just really, really hard. So there's a lot of work there. With tertiary processes, you have to be very specific. You need to know what it is that you're wanting to get out, whether it's phosphorus, whether it's nitrogen, whether it's whatever. And each one of those processes are specifically designed for that particular parameter. And so they're very, very complex, and they're also very costly. And but that is a role that I think that there is a lot of room for in terms of public behavior. Metro Vancouver tried it even with respect to surfactants. With the very soft water that we have, low alkalinity, and it's also it's a very corrosive mountain water that we have here. And so people don't know it, but when you buy Tide, Procter & Gamble goes and packages all that materials for an average hardness of water all over North America that's not particular to the region that we're in. In Europe, they have ratings that are actually more rated to water hardness and that sort of thing, but here are not. And then they just want to sell shampoo, they want to sell detergent, they want to sell toothpaste. And here in this water here, we only need a fraction of what the manufacturer suggests is necessary. And Metro Vancouver actually had a bit of a campaign that they tried to use social marketing, where they gave out these these blue spoons. And it's about half the amount of what the manufacturer suggests that you put into your laundry. And they went into places like Lululemon, and they tried to partner with them, and yoga moms and who might be doing the laundry at the same time as they're going to those yoga places. They try and go in there and sort of teach them, hey, did you know you could only, you could save money, save the environment, use half, It's a very, very high-touch program, and it was only moderately successful, and those are some of the challenges that we face on the wastewater side.
Maria, I have a question for you. Could you share with us a little bit of the prices of that an average consumer will pay and a high-end consumer will pay in the city of West Vancouver? And also maybe how much, after the metering, how much the consumption in the group of high end users, the 17% you mentioned, how much the consumption of them changed?
Yeah, I don't have the exact figure on me, but I think that a median water bill this year would be about $475, something around there. And we issue bills on a quarterly basis, and you could get water bills that are like $70, $60, every quarter. And we have water bills that are like $1,000 per quarter. And to your second question, before metering, after metering, there's no difference, because at that high end, when you have like a 7,000 square foot home and all these, 7 bathrooms or whatever, the cost of water just doesn't factor into the household costs, and they just pay it. And, they just kind of move on. So it's interesting. At least we can say it's more equitable if we can't say that we actually had a huge impact on those high users.
Okay. All right.
I just spoke to this a little bit, Ray, and maybe you two can speak as well. What did you find were aspects of the population in the district of West Van, and also maybe in the staff or in the elected politicians that made this watering program so successful, or maybe what could have been different, like what aspects of the community could have been different for it to be less or more successful? Like if we were trying to do this in another community in Metro Vancouver, say maybe not Vancouver but another one, what are the aspects of that exist that would make this program either a success or maybe not a success, the metering program?
I'll just keep it short. I think equity. It's the equity issue that and also a philosophy that's bent towards user pay. And in West Van, we're sort of a very user pay type of community, and so it feeds into that philosophy quite well.
I was curious, who paid for sorry, words have lost me. The metering, like who actually paid for it? Because you said the number, how much it actually cost.
Right.
So who paid for it? Was it, yeah?
So ultimately, the ratepayer, the water user, pays.
But the meter, sorry, the installation of
Yeah.
the meters.
So
Oh,
ultimately, the ratepayer pays because water is a utility type of function. And so it was a municipal project, and the municipality went and undertook all the installation. But that capital costs, the municipality sort of took out a loan for that and decided to amortize that loan over 15 years and would charge a little bit every month and tack that on as an extra charge to each account. And again, in West Van, there's also a bias also with people that don't like debt. So we had people actually pushing back to sort of say, well, how much is my share? Because I want to pay it all up front now. I don't want to pay this, over my bills for 15 years and that sort of thing. And so we actually created a little option that they could pay it out. And
how much is it?
well, at that time, it was back in 2005. We got an extremely good contract, and so our average costs were running at around $600 per household. Yeah.
What you're talking about now is, this is different from the flat rate charge first and then the incremental?
That's correct. No, that's a good point. That's a separate charge, because we did have, prior to universal metering, just like City of Vancouver, where we had meters put in through new development. And so we had a certain amount of meters already in when we started the project, and we didn't think it was fair for them to double pay essentially for their meters, and so that's why it's not part of the base charge. It's a separately identifiable charge. Yeah.
So Riley,
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that city departments are now paying for their fair share. I'm just kind of wondering what Parks bill is looking like and what they're doing, and if it's kind of inspired them to do things differently.
Is it for Ray or for City of Vancouver? Our parks are metered, but we don't bill them, so I'm not sure if I could speak to that.
Oh, they don't.
Yeah, maybe West
They
Vancouver.
use a lot of water though,
Yeah,
our
there's
parks, and
60
so we're
different users.
trying to work with them to figure out a way to get their bills down, because they are very large water users. So.
Yeah, that was identified in one of the things we're thinking about in moving forward. So not something we've addressed yet, but something on our radar in future programming for water conservation is our in-house billing.
Is it typically drinking or treated drinking water that they use?
Yeah.
For the landscape?
Yeah, it is, sadly.
Mm-hmm. And West Van, we were doing the same sort of things as well, trying to reduce waste, changing the times where they sprinkle their lawns, working with golf courses, for example. And we use treated drinking water as well. They don't have any well sources, unfortunately. But the way that golf course turf is managed is this very specialized industry. So kind of work with them too to try and reduce their water use.
What would you say in Vancouver are the big barriers to taking maybe a stronger stand on billing more or putting in more meters, or what would you say are the big barriers to?
Well, meters is the cost, and I think Ray touched on that. Like, that's a huge cost, and it's if people are doing it on their own through development as it continues and as renovations continue, then we don't necessarily need to invest that huge bulk of money. Maybe in the future, when there's less houses that are still not metered, that's something to address then.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the biggest barrier for metering.
How for like say the parks example for not billing, is it a barrier there?
I think I don't know. Would you be able to speak better to that?
I don't think it's a I think it's just a matter of us working closer with them. Like, I think up until recently, they weren't even metered, were they? Like, it's just been the last few years that we've started to really get all the meters working, and we've got programs now where we can look at the data that's coming in a little bit more easily so that we can compare different community centers and different parks to each other. And so it's just a matter of us getting more familiar with how it's used and developing a program, you know, jointly with them to help get water usage down.
And that's a lot of work. Like,
Yeah.
you really need a dedicated account manager for that who can do all of that, and that's another person to bring on. It is a lot of administration.
And I mean, there's challenges like we have lakes, they need to have water in them. So if we're not using tap water, what's going to happen to them? So up until now, we just fill them with tap water, and it's just now, you know, the conversations, we're trying to get them started on, hey guys, could we maybe use rainwater to fill the lakes instead of tap water? And they're tough conversations to have, and they're expensive conversations to have. So, yeah.
You know, I would say that the biggest barriers to parks is that the argument would be, and to make them pay for it, and that's what we do in West Van. And so it's a line on their operating budget, and it's like, you know, we have to deal with hydro, we have to deal with gas, and we have to deal with our own internal, you know, utilities, and you know, you can't give us a break, that type of thing. So the biggest barrier there is that they would argue you're just robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, it comes out of the taxpayer in the end, and so you're just going from here to here. Why are you doing it? But for us, we just felt that we wanted to just protect the water fund and make sure that the pots were made whole in the right way for accountability's sake, and that's how we defended it.
Roy, for being the greenest city in the world, we're not doing very well with wastewater. And generally we pay far more for domestic water than for wastewater, yet it should be the other way around. What are your rates now before the sewage treatment plant gets renewed, and what will it be after?
Yeah, so that's an interesting conundrum because, you know, here we're saying that we're going to reinforce the sewer behavior through the water rates. So if your water consumption is down, your sewage bill is going to go down. But these processes are very, very costly. And when you're working on a unit rate and you have so much fixed costs, if you have a smaller amount of units, that means that the per unit rate is just going to go up. And so you get caught on that, right? And so it's really, really tough. And so it is very interesting. We're trying to attract senior government cost sharing because it is the Canadian municipal wastewater guidelines that are affecting our requirement to go to secondary treatment, even though I know we only have primary now, but it is a very real cost. And if we were not to be successful in a government grant, right now, also the sewer rates, that includes a metro share as well as municipal share, is also around $450, $500. It would like double at least if we didn't get any cost sharing on that plant, and we were still required to do it.
I mean, now it's the opportunity to actually bite the bullet and do it, right? Because if you upgrade it, you might as well upgrade it to tertiary. And the Royal Bank Blue Economy actually did a survey, public survey across the countries, and 77% of the public said they're willing to pay more for water and wastewater. Yet, we don't politically want to address the issue. Remember, nobody in Vancouver is on tertiary treatment. We don't take any contaminants out, we just aerate it and take the sediment out. For a green city, that to me, that's not very green.
Yeah, there's a lot of arguments. You know, there's also the argument that the capacity of our ocean waters and Burrard Inlet to absorb the effluent is sufficient, and so the currents and the absorptive capacity of the waters means that you'd be wasting your money by going to that higher level of treatment. So that's some of the arguments the other way.
You all mentioned that for public amenities like Trout Lake, those are using public drinking water, and of course the issue with treating stormwater or wastewater on the way out. Has there been talk about assessing the value of or piloting green infrastructure to take up some of these kind of tasks, either by capturing, for public amenities or as a way of treating stormwater before it goes out into the ocean?
I can't speak to what will be happening in future, but I know about a year ago there was some discussion about Trout Lake and developing their master plan of John Henry Park. And there was talk about the sewer system has been separated, so it was a combined system where your stormwater and your sanitary waste is all going into one pipe to the treatment plant. So in the catchment around Still Creek, that whole area has been separated. So we just have stormwater in one pipe, sanitary waste in the other pipe. So sanitary goes to the treatment plant and storm goes to a natural water body. And so the catchment around Trout Lake, for example, is ready to take that stormwater to be used for something else. But we're not there yet. So there's a huge master plan that has to go with that. We have to figure out how to clean that water, clean all the heavy metals and all the contaminants that come from road runoff and from roofs and whatnot. And that might be putting in a infiltration pond or putting a bit of a wetland, and also be engineered and structured. And there's a lot of public engagement that has to go with that, and people don't want anything happening with their parks. They really value their parks, so people are very hesitant to allow any kind of changes. So it's a really long process, an expensive process to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, when your slides for the City of Vancouver, you mentioned that sort of the highest growth rates in water consumption has been in the institutional and industrial commercial area in terms of growth rate. Do you have a breakdown of which sectors are actually contributing the most to that growth?
We do. I don't know it off the top of my head. We have the data. So basically, they're all metered. Everybody in the ICNI is metered, and so we can see. I could pull up any organization and see exactly how much water they're using. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Does it sort of trend towards a certain type of industry?
I mean, breweries use a lot of water for the beer making process. So I think Molson is like one of the biggest users. So. I know that there are large users.
It's a bit tricky with the bigger users because they're kind of their own, like the Rogers Sugar Company, that's a category all on its own, but it's only one business that uses a lot of water, and same with the breweries. Well, there's more of them now, but there wasn't 2 years ago. And so really there's the top users, there's very few of them, but they're large users, so it's hard to put them all into one category.
I think too, you also want to look at the size of the business, hours of operation, number of employees, what it's used for. Like there's so many factors within it that would, even a hotel, for example, you have a huge hotel with 500 rooms versus a hotel with 100 rooms. It's going to be pretty different usage.
Right. Maybe it would be more interesting, I'm not sure if you guys can do this or if you are doing this, but to capture sort of the rate of sewage water that they're producing, or how they've been treating that as well. Is that something that the City of Vancouver is looking into?
That's something that Metro is developing some policy on right now, particularly with fermenters and brewers, because the waste coming out of those facilities is very strong. They use the word strong, so it's got a high BOD, biological oxygen demand, and so that's very expensive to treat at the treatment plant. And so they're trying to implement a policy, and they're looking for feedback right now on that policy. They have a proposed policy on their website, and they're open for some feedback on that if any of you are interested. And so what that'll mean is metering how much waste is going out and testing the strength of it. So they want to know the BOD, the pH, and some other parameters. And then they'll pay based on that. So what I understand now is there's permitted users, so things like the breweries, they'll have to have a permit for the effluent. So they pay a yearly fee for that permit so that they can put that effluent into the waste stream, and it supposedly covers the additional costs. But the new policy will have them actually monitoring how much and how strong it is. And so Vancouver, I'm not sure what the implications of that are for us specifically yet. I don't think we'll know until we see what the final policy is going to be.
Okay, thanks.
We'll take one last quick question. Maybe someone has a question. Yeah. Jenna?
I'm just wondering if you know which, for the reduction in residential water use, which of the programs or policies have had the greatest impact? Or if any have had like a much greater impact than others, like for example, like reducing sprinkler use compared to like flushing the toilet less or something like that.
That's a good question. It's tricky. That's a tricky question because we don't have metering. So that's one of the big barriers to our programs is how do we measure success? And that's been something that's really challenging for us to do without metering. so I can't really.
I think the one thing, the green landlord program, so we retrofitted rental stock, select rental stock with toilets and low flow faucets, and we can see the results, and they have definitely trended down. So we're happy to see that. But yeah, as Shelley said, it's hard to monitor otherwise.
I'd like to just ask the last question, diverging a little bit from water, but sort of, or specifically on water if you'd like, but do you have any advice or suggestions for future planners who are going through the program on what it's like to work in the city, or just general sort of career professional advice, water related or not?
I can go first. I wish I had a communications degree instead of an environmental science degree. I think that would help me a lot. So communications is the biggest part. The science is there, but if you can't communicate to people and you don't have those skills, there's no point in having science because you can't do anything with it.
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I've been in your shoes. I'm a planner as well, and I finished my master's degree a few years ago, and I don't know. I worked for the city for a few years before doing my master's on Southeast Falls Creek in the Olympic Village project in the planning department there, and did my master's, and then I worked on the private side for a few years for a real estate developer. And I think having both the private and the public experience has been really helpful in terms of my career today. It's given me an understanding of so many different aspects and organizational structures, and how decisions are made, and the experiences I had working on the private side. I had a really big title, I was director of community relations, and I had a lot of responsibility that I wouldn't have had, off the bat working public. But I also put in extremely long hours. So there's definitely trade-offs, and I think to you guys, I'd figure out where you see yourself heading and get as much sort of experience in different areas as you can to help your career move forward.
Just from my own experience, for me, I thought it was good to have years of separation from when I left UBC the first time around with bachelor's and when I decided to go for my master's program. Maybe it's too late because you're all in there, you're in a planning program now. But I thought that those years were really important for me to kind of actually find out what it is that I wanted to do. And when I first got out, I remember that the economy was just in a big, huge nosedive. So we all went and registered for our master's, but it kind of turned over within half a year. And I ended up finding work. But I think that it was better actually that I went into work and then came back to school because it gave me a better understanding of what it was that I want to do. But in terms of planning, I mean, I'm not a planner, I'm an engineer, and people like to think that there's a huge separation between engineers and planners, but we're not actually all that different. I think it's an exciting time to be in Vancouver right now, and you have so much potential just in terms of the progressiveness of the city and where we're all going and striving to create more compact communities, and whether it's transportation we're talking about or whether it's on water and talking about sustainability and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of promise and a lot of exciting challenges that we certainly need planners and people coming out of the schools. And one of the things we're interested in too is more collaborations between the schools and government to try and help, it's a win-win situation. Yeah.
Great, okay, excellent. All right, well, thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. Please join me in.
So, Roy,
Yes?
how much do you pay for your sewers? Just the sewer?
Thanks.
The sewer component?
Yeah, for residential.
For a median bill is about $470.
So it's about the same as the
As
drinking
water,
water.
yeah. But it's going to go up to